course. My name's Chris Westcott, and just to remind you, if you haven't seen me before, my experience, I've spent 30 years with RBS and NatWest, and 20 plus in RBS and NatWest's treasury function. And my last job for my sins was as Basel III program director, implementing Basel III. Tonight's subject is liquidity reporting, stress testing, and ILA. And there's a little bit at the end, etc., because what I've tried to do is, should we say, look at liquidity in the whole and pick up anything that we haven't covered yet. Good evening. I'm still on the first page, so you're all right. So, but just you. Down, isn't it? Firstly, this is where we are in the cohort structure. This is lecture 19. You'll see that there have been some other references to liquidity. And on the plus side, you've only got the 3 to go after this one. And on the minus side, I think you've got an exam at the end of it. Can't win them all. Okay, so just moving on to slide 3 in the packs. I've just, at a very high level, summarised what I think you've seen so far and what we're going to cover tonight. As you can see, if we look at the kind of the lighter coloured, the stuff where on the right-hand side it generally says no, liquidity reporting, liquidity stress testing, and the individual liquidity adequacy assessment. That's what we mentioned in the title. But also, I'm going to cover 3 other items. Some recent regulatory developments. These are going to be mainly focused on UK, but I have some comments on other countries, which comes in that what is happening in other jurisdictions. And then at the end, we're going to do a case study on my bank, as was RBS. But we're going to do this in reverse. Normally, I do this right at the beginning of any discussion on liquidity. This time, I'm going to do it right at the end. And hopefully, as we go through it, we'll see all of the kind of telltale signs that could well have been addressed earlier, but weren't, which led to some of the problems in that organisation. In the room, can you see the slide? Or, I mean, I guess you've got your books and hopefully you can read the stuff in the books, if not. Okay. So, first up, liquidity reporting. Now, kind of the first comment here is I would imagine a lot of people's hearts sink when they hear the term liquidity reporting. And if you bump into somebody and say, where do you work? When they say liquidity reporting, have we got any liquidity reporters in the room? No. And we may have some online, but generally, I think it can be seen as, should we say, as a process that you have to go through in a bank, but it's actually an incredibly important process. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning, and this is where the, how should we say, the online people have life slightly easier than those in the room, is that I don't want to do absolutely all the talking tonight. So, guys in the room, I'll ask a few questions. Don't worry, nothing too strenuous, but a few questions to kind of help us going. So, liquidity reporting. Why do we do it? And I'm just going to jump to slide 6, and then I'll go back to number 5. But in the room, just before we do that, why do you think liquidity reporting is useful or necessary? Have we got any ideas? Well, why do banks do it? Yeah. So that was so you know your cash flow position against inflows and outflows, which yes is an important reason why banks do it. Any other thoughts? No, yes, okay. So that comment is basically because we have to. Both actually very fair points. I sat down and thought about this for a minute, and I've written down a few, which we're just going to have a look at. So just on slide 6, and we'll go back to slide 5. So these are my top 6 reasons why banks do liquidity reporting. Not in any specific order here. So if you report to the regulator on your liquidity positions, then the regulator can then provide feedback to you on whether he, she, it thinks they're good liquidity positions or bad liquidity positions. It especially enables the regulator to identify and challenge outliers. So if all banks are reporting, it can pick up the ones it doesn't like the look of and challenge them specifically. It helps, if you can imagine, I don't know how many banks there are in London, but there are a few hundred, and if they're all liquidity reporting, then that gives the regulator an opportunity to build up a massive database of kind of what's good, what's bad, what's happening in particular sectors, etc. So it's a very rich form of data to the regulator. But I think, to me, the key thing, which was the point mentioned in the initial answer, is that by doing liquidity reporting, banks actually have the ability to understand their own positions. You know, the regulator's not being difficult and saying you need to report all of these horrible things over here that are no use to anyone. They're actually saying report on items that are really significant to you. And I think the regulator's hoping that banks will look closely and try and understand the messages in their liquidity reports. The regulator, certainly since 2007, has basically beefed up their own functions, and when those reports from the banks go in, the regulators have their own stress tests that they apply to the reports, and that helps them in their identification of basically banks facing difficulty.